Okay, Marina, if you want to go for it, we're recording.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so honored and excited to be here today and to introduce to you all these amazing educators, scholar, and activists. And it's not only because she's a professor at my alma mater or because the topic she will speak of is dear to my heart, but it's because Lennita is an inspiring mentor who has shown me how academia can be a humane space where we treat each other as equals and work together to change our surroundings. Lennita Oliveira Ruggi has a master's degree in post-colonialisms and global citizenship from the University of Coimbra in Portugal, as well as another master's degree in sociology from the Federal University of the State of Paraná. She has developed research about the representation of women in cultural production, the representation of schools in entertainment discourses, and the sociology of the body. She's currently pursuing her doctoral degree in gender equality in higher education in the Center for Global Women's Studies at the National University of Ireland. This amazing sociology and lovely human being is a professor at the Federal University of Paraná in Brazil, and she has been teaching the sociology of education there since 2010. And I was lucky enough to be introduced to that field by her, and I certainly owe her so much of my passion for social theory. In 2016, along with high school students and university students, Lennita participated in the Occupy movement, where more than 800 schools were occupied in our state to oppose an authoritarian, illegitimate government trying to defund public education. In 2017, she worked with her co-author, Valeria Furiano Machado, along with other collaborators, to put together the memories of the occupations in a book called Ocupar y Resistir, Occupy and Resist. That's what she'll be talking about today, and I'm really excited to hear what she has to say.
Wow, my heart is even racing here now, Marina. I wasn't expecting. So first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. This is very precious to me, and thank you for all of you who took your time to be here. I want to give a most special thanks to Colleen McDermott, the administrative coordinator who organized this event. I'm doing a PhD on gender equality in higher education, so I'm acutely aware of the invisible and gendered nature of the admin work done in academia. Colleen wrote 16, actually 18 emails to organize. She wrote to me to organize this event the last couple of weeks. I counted it, and I counted it because I think it's important and it needs to be highlighted. So Colleen, I hope you get the recognition that you deserve on a day-to-day basis. With me, you're not only very efficient, but very, very kind in all the messages. So a very special thanks to you. And of course, I also want to give a super special thanks to Marina. And I'm even like emotional now with everything you said. But of course, you first suggested this event and opened the door for me here. And I suppose we have a long time dialogue. I was trying to remember if it was either 2018 or 2011 or 12 that we met. In a classroom that I think had 5 Vanessas or something like that, and it was really big. And since then, we have been doing all this academic work, bits and pieces together, and I guess I have this. It's a good opportunity also for me to say publicly the amount of respect that I have for the work you do, Marina, and especially for the way you do it. And I think this sort of interlocution, the ones that are long-term and that are fruitful, these are the things that makes me believe universities are worth it, are worth our time and are worth our effort. These relationships that we are able to foster and to sustain in these spaces. So I'm assuming you're all able to see here my slides. So this person here in the left corner, that's Valeria Furiano, who is another one of these really cherished people for me. She's the co-author of this presentation. She's not here today because she doesn't speak English, so that would make it harder and a bit meaningless for her. But she's the one who's been doing systematic research on the students' occupational experience with students themselves. And we are presenting this shared work that we have been doing as well. We made the same selection process to teach sociology of education in the Federal University of Paraná. We were hired almost at the same time in 2010, and we have engaged in the Occupy movement together. I'm going to go through that with you a bit. And since then, we have been working, trying to make sense of what happened and somehow trying to make it public. And this was a really significant experience to us, I guess. And so, yeah. That's why it's such a great opportunity to be here with you today. And yeah, I might be wrong, but I am assuming this is a context that's distant from most of you, or is there more Brazilians or Latin American people in the rooms who would be willing to put their hands up? To be honest, at this point, I cannot even see everybody that's around. Yeah, Marina, would you give me a clue on that?
I don't think, I think we're the only.
Okay, so my assumption is sort of correct in that. So yeah, I guess I'm also very aware of the fact that in the graduate school of education, you have like a ongoing dialogue that I'm not private to you, and well, I hope to offer some contribution to this dialogue. And yeah, I hope you will also be willing to share this a bit with me by the end of my talk. So yeah, the last thing then before I get started is that do please let me know if I'm not making sense, either because the content is not well put together or because of my accent or because of some internet connections. Yeah, or I'm talking too fast. What I mean to say is that it's all right to be interrupted. Interruptions are welcome. I hope to talk for 40 minutes or so. And yeah, and I'm going to read a bit as well, because that makes it easier to make a coherent argument. So yeah, there are many and diversified pedagogical proposals on what to do in a classroom, but they seldom challenge deep-rooted presuppositions around education. We hardly come across sleeping, for example, as an educational procedure. Toothbrushes and cutlery are not considered as necessary as pencils, textbooks, and chalks, for example. As obvious as it sounds, the understanding of education as an external add-on to our daily life is evidence of how educational spaces reinstall public versus private divide and segregation, and how education participates in the status quo machinery. The education system is undeniably an efficient gear in the ideological state apparatus. It legitimizes inequality by unevenly distributing credentials, entitlements, income, cultural, social, and symbolical capitals. However, maliciously hierarchizing people through the hoax of meritocracy is not everything a school system does. As long-held practiced hopes have proved, a pedagogy of the oppressed can teach to transgress. Beyond the presumption promises of enlightenment, the educational disciplinary dispositive cannot fully prevent the existence of the undercommons. And against all odds, everyday relations are capable of being reshaped according to significant undercurrents and circumstances that affect our lives. Indeed, what happens when people do use a mattress and a pillow in a school space among other classmates and colleagues? Or when they join the cooking committee, become responsible for sweeping the floors or handling the security in their own schools or universities? What happens when students get to decide what a regular school should be, what and how things are to be done? What happens when the syllabus, the schedules, the courses, the grades, and the teaching materials are determined by the collective need of mobilization against an oppressive government? To say in another way, what happens during a school occupation? Because uprisings entail the intention politicization of daily life. As Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui describes it, In these delirious moments of collective action, what is experienced is a change in consciousness, in identity, and in the way of doing, in the ways of doing, of knowing, the ways we conceive politics. So we want to expand a bit on the far-reaching meaning of this delirium, presenting here our romanticized testimonial of the Occupy movement that transformed educational spaces in Paraná in 2016. So this presentation is of course a challenge because it grows from a deep feeling that's hard to convey in a way. The way I feel about the Ocupas is that through the Occupy movement, I somehow access this endless wheel of hope. And so our presentation here, as I said, has everything to do with a testimonial or this personal narration of a really politically charged experience. I suppose there's no better way to start than giving some sort of antecedents. Colleen told me there that I could share some reading with you, and I was not really sure what to offer. It's kind of hard to find materials in English about this precise occupation. Valeria and I were about to publish a paper in the SAAP journal. That's the bulk of what I'm going to be presenting here today. And Valeria has a chapter in a book that's also just about to come out, but neither were available, unfortunately. So then we thought maybe something that could give a context, and that's why we came around with two pieces from Eliane Brum. I'm not sure if you had a chance to actually engage with it and read it, but for me, it was quite an interesting experience to go back and read newspaper pieces from 2016, so 4 years ago, and it really gives the flavor of the urgency, the development of the events, the agony, all these immediate things that were going on. So in terms of the way things were developed for social movements, in 2015, there was a big mobilization in the state of Paraná, and especially in its capital, Curitiba, because there was an attempt by the state government to appropriate the retirement funds from the state civil servants. That was about 14 billion US dollars. I made, don't hold me to this number because I made a quick conversion that completely disrespecting the fact that that was a couple of years ago. But the fact is they wanted to put their hands on the retirement funds from the civil servants. So there was a bunch of political demonstrations happening since January. The state assembly had been occupied for a couple of weeks. Then it was disoccupied. And then on April 29, 20,000 people were in front of the state assembly for the final voting of this legislation. And it was a really extreme situation of police violence. So I decided I wasn't going to include any pictures here to share with you, even though there are thousands, because I think there's also a limit on how much we want to, increase on that sort of, well, it's a conversation to be had, but anyway, in this case, I decided that wasn't the core of what I wanted to say. The fact is, this became known as the Centro Cívico Massacre. So, and it created a huge, widespread political outrage, a really big scandal on the level of violence, with the shoppers flying around, the whole bombs, and so many people hurt and all of that. So that was a big thing in terms of how also students were feeling, and the feelings within the education, the schoolings and the schooling and everything. And then on the second semester, from October to December, there was a big school occupation movement in São Paulo, so the state that's just above Curitiba, just above Paraná, and it was against some, so secondary education in Brazil, I'm not sure how it is in the US, but it would be the responsibility of the states from a big chunk of the primary and secondary education. So they had policies that would affect the state level, and the students, one of the biggest things was the fact that they were going to close a bunch of schools, and 213 schools were occupied by the students. So that's 2015. Then 2016, there's a whole preparation. That's what Eliane Broom's article talks a bit about, the preparation for the state coup, when Dilma Rousseff is taken from the government. Yeah, I might go back to the text because I for the reason I get lost. So in August 2016, a state coup ended Dilma Rousseff mandate and empowered Michel Temer, who is here on your right, to push the Brazilian federal government deeper into the neoliberal bottomless pit. Temer's first action as illegitimate government was to attack the security allocation of public servants. So he proposed to do an amendment to the Brazilian constitution to put in place a 20-year budget freeze on public spending towards health and education. And at the same time, he issued a policy change in secondary education that aimed to impoverish the curriculum, canceling the disciplines or modules like arts, philosophy, physical education, sociology, abolishing evening classes, increasing the mandatory classroom hours, and basically segregating the system to impose work training for some and propedeutical education for the privileged others. So he also lessened the requisition for teacher training, opening a possibility to have experienced a very dodgy way to describe people teaching in schools. What's very significant is that neither teachers, principals, parents, unions, local government, nor students were consulted during the making up of these policies. So these new authoritarian measures, they were especially detrimental to disadvantaged students, and the disadvantaged students knew it. I'm ready to debate disadvantage here. I'm not actually very happy with this term, but bear with me for now. So during September 2016, in several locations of Paraná and other states of Brazil, students and educators publicly denounced the pervasive impacts of the reforms. Protesters were fully aware that the proposals were based on a commodified understanding of education and that they strategized for the increasing of social inequality. The demonstrations were not taken seriously by the government, who ignored the demands, nor by the traditional media that impatiently overlooked street rallies and demonstrations, failing to report the movements and deflating the political debate. So on October 3rd, 2016, more than 200 students occupied the Colégio Estadual Arnaldo Jansen. So that's the state school Arnaldo Jansen in the municipality of São José dos Pinhais. That's in the metropolitan region of Curitiba, the state capital of Paraná. Paraná, you can see is there in the yellow part. It's where Marina and myself come from. I'm very sorry if you know where Paraná is. I just don't have that expectation, so I thought I better put a little map there. This first Ocupa in the Arnaldo Jansen School was immediately publicized on social media by students themselves, and from then on, the movement spread like a sparkle. In 2 weeks, 850 high schools, 14 universities, and 3 public buildings were occupied solely in the state of Paraná. At least 1,100 in the whole country were occupied in the following month. I'm not sure if it's worth competing for greatness, but I do want to say that this Ocupa in the Paraná was the biggest student-occupied movement in the world so far. So I guess it's something to be said. So taking possession of the space, regulating the access and interrupting the normal activities, the movement achieved greater visibility and disrupted ordinary teachings and normal political dealings. The Ocupas Paraná employed a tactic that had already been tried out before in school occupations in Chile and other Brazilian states like São Paulo that I just mentioned. This form of action was characterized mainly by changes in the decision-making process, founded in the concept of horizontality, which prioritized the exercise of shared responsibility and collective organization. So as one person from the Ocupa herself said, the enjoyment of horizontality was itself a horizon. A large share of the day in the occupations was dedicated to meeting and assemblies. This responded to the need to collectively address the pragmatic organization, including the need to create the collectivity itself. The sentiment of us was stronger within the group of people that composed the Ocupa in each school, but the network of communication using social media, street demonstration, and interinstitutional assemblies developed a wider atmosphere of euphoria and solidarity. So this feeling of community sprung from the recognition of being on the same side of the political struggle, having common enemies, facing the same threat, and sharing the responsibility to react against the new policies, the Ocupas created a we. We filled up the streets with people mirroring and cheering each other. We recognized each other by our badges, our chants, and some sort of glowing aura emanating from the mixture of anger and hope. The degree of affection and intimacy increased to a point that family metaphors would be used among Ocupas in communicating their relations. The Ocupa were very conscious of their autonomy and critically detached themselves from political parties or unions and the traditional students' entities like student unions and the sort. In fact, the Ocupas demanded not only to stop the implementation of authoritarian education policies, but particularly the right to participate in the decision-making processes, especially in the daily organization of the educational space itself. So during the occupations, actions of disobedience gradually took shape when the authorized, accepted, and defined forms of using the educational environment were disordered. The unprecedented moments prompted various experimental methods of occupying the school space, including mattresses in the library, musical instruments in the kitchen, theater performances in the courtyard, and mandatory syllabus discussed in circles of dialogism. The learning territories, previously standardized by institutional prescriptions, were proven versatile simply by the Ocupas claiming responsibility for the maintenance of their educational space and by deciding how to work it together. The promise of learning expanded beyond tutelage and was not constrained by the classist division of manual versus intellectual labor. So I'm going to take the word of Juliana here, who's 16-year-old in another occupation. So much so that here now, during the occupation, we are doing the work of the cleaning ladies. We are cooking for all these people. We are doing the work of the teacher here. I think that nobody would come here if they were obliged to. Oh, sorry, there's a typo there, obliged, if they obliged me. Do you know what I mean? We're coming willingly. And so I think that's the main point. So there's a whole declaration of autonomy here that I think is very significant in terms of how people related to the Ocupas. Daily chores performed collectively in the school or university space transformed bodies and relations. The cooperative care for the space and for one another created a deeper sense of belonging and a reconstructed understanding of education. The meanings of the political uprising were constructed over shared bread and the intimacy of those who dreamed the same dream or dreaded the same present. Commensality itself became a code of learning through sharing. Every cook governing proved to be as fruitful as an ignorant schoolmaster's. So the whole, I guess the argument we're trying to do here is how much through the occupations, through the Occupy movement, care activities performed collectively in the school university disrupt this whole idea of public and private divide. And that meant a lot in terms of what's possible to do and to accomplish. So I'm taking the words here of Mariani, who is also, all the quotations I'm using here are from people in the occupations. So the occupation brought knowledge beyond what's acquired within a classroom. In addition to what we come across in textbooks that never showed us the true story. We put boys and girls in the kitchen and in cleaning because our ideology suits. Got a bit lost here, so sorry. Was there someone saying anything? No, I'm imagining. Sorry. We put boys and girls in the kitchen and in the cleaning because our ideology suits with gender equality. Even though simple tasks, we managed to pass this construction. In the occupation, there were Black men and Black women, girls, boys, and LGBT people with the only hope to see the world around us change. So no survey was conducted to biopolitically label and identify participants in the occupation. Self-assessment based on asystematic samples of intuitive statistics show, nonetheless, that Ocupa consisted mostly of non-white women and queer-identified people. As baptized by Lélia Gonzalez, it would be African peoples challenging the ideology of racial democracy in Brazil. Indeed, it seems relevant that the Occupy happened after a decade of democratization of Brazilian public education. In primary and secondary schools, the expansion of access to schooling was strengthened by attempts to decolonize the syllabus. Teaching of Africa and African Brazilian history and culture became mandatory in 2003, of indigenous history and culture in 2018. Also in 2018, the gradual inclusion of sociology and philosophy in secondary education was accomplished. In tertiary education, quotas to promote access of racialized and impoverished students to public university transformed the demographics of what had been an overwhelmingly white and elite student population. So the meritocratic ideology was being challenged from within the system. Expansive classrooms were viscerally aware of the pervasive nature of gender, sexuality, race, and ethnicity and class structures. Politicized sociabilities intersecting feminism, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, and anti-transphobia guided interpersonal relations and the contestation of conventional pedagogies. I have here quite a long quotation, but I'm gonna ask your patient to read it because it is a pretty one. In my everyday life, listening to unwanted comments and being socially excluded was normal, and I accepted it. Not that I thought it was right, but I was afraid of how people would react or what they would think of me. Last year, with the Occupy movement for the fight against right school reform and the freezing funds for education and health, I came across a place where prejudice and discrimination were unacceptable. There I met my rights as a citizen, and I was not afraid to be who I am. And mostly it was where I used the ladies' restroom without fear. Being trans and fighting for your rights in education was something that inspired me to continue my fight and accept myself more and more. Now, when I hear something in the street, I really don't care, and I know I don't have time to waste dealing with transphobic and misogynists. I will always carry in my heart the struggle of women that I admire and respect a lot. Call me Joanna. The principle of horizontality that persisted as an active mechanism among the occupiers disrupted the conventional relations of powers and the traditional and hierarchical forms of decision-making. While not all the principals, teachers, and lecturers were willing to reconsider their role of authority, some did nonetheless. And some people give an account of here. This is, I'm gonna breach her anonymity here. This is a quote from Mônica Ribeiro da Silva. Marina would also know her as a lecturer in UFPR, in our university. And she says, I saw a new pedagogy being practiced, led by students in form, content, language. It filled me with hope and strength. No, it will never be the same again, neither nor they. Neither we nor they. It might be useful to give some context on how we became personally involved. Right at the beginning of the students' occupation, and I'm sure Marina maybe you would agree with me if I said that the School of Education in the Federal University of Paraná is quite politicized. Yeah, that's a partial yes. The point is, right at the beginning of the secondary school's occupation, the board of the School of Education issued a motion of support. So it basically recommended that students and lecture link in with the occupations, visit them, support them, engage in the movement of resistance that was being built in the secondary educations. And we really did it during our work time and fully legitimized. So that made a huge difference. I personally went to, I don't know, maybe 10 schools, something like that, mostly to do workshops on feminism, anti-racism, and anti-classism, and anti-ableism, but sometimes just to hang out with people, to help them fight on support for principles and to honor and enjoy their battle. Valeria, on the other hand, she connected more strongly with the school close to her house, and she created deep feelings of affection and would go like very many times to the same place. And meanwhile, what happened was that in the end of October, the place where we ourselves worked, the reitoria of UFPR was occupied by students. And it was so incredible, and we were so hugely proud because the core of the movement was from people majoring in pedagogy, so students from the School of Education itself, and most of them women and first generations, because pedagogy would be one of the doors to first generation people in tertiary education. It was true in other camp of the university as well. It was the students who were more directly, would be more directly affected by the new policies. So that would be nursing, occupational therapy students, physical educational, dance, music, and so forth. So so that was parallel to what was happening in the secondary education. And of course, then there was the movement within the academic staff. And on the end of November, so November 22nd, the academic staff union had a ballot for a strike to get involved in the movement, but the strike lost. We lost. There were 193 votes in favor of the strike, 257 against, and 20 abstentions. One lecturer who voted against the strike said that strike is an anachronic and overused tool, and that we should aim to create new political tactics. So we're talking about 20 years freeze in the budget for public health and education, and it was a really hard one to fight there. As it usually is in assemblies like this, once the people against the strike voted, they left the room, and we got to scream a lot at them, vergonha, but it didn't change the resolution. So once they left, someone proposed that we support the students' occupation by joining them, and that's what happened. So that same evening, 9 of us gathered forces with the Occupy, so other lectures. Another joined on the following days, yeah, that included Valeria and me. And it was life-changing. To be in the cycles, in the circles, in the horizontal decision-making processes, to be involved with students without the armor of the teacher role, without the constraint of the institutional role, made a huge difference. So yeah, the practice of horizontality revealed to us that compliance with the expected patterns of behavior in a position of power crystallizes not only the social structures, but subjectivities. We learned that with the ocupas, that dislodging the unquestioned habitual pattern in society through reshaping relationship offers an opportunity to revise our sense of self. It's like becoming ingovernable. There's a shallow dimension to this epiphany. The relations, subjectivity, and social structures are intermingled, and that they exchange together. Despite its obviousness, or because of it, the magic lies on finally partaking in such a process. A whole range of emotions and conditionings prove to be the effect of and accomplice with the establishment. So shame, shyness, self-doubt, all of it sort of lose its hold when the collective demands someone to step into the mic or to do something else for the cause. All of a sudden, whatever is attempt is more important than ideologically cultivated self-limitations. So this is a piece from Regina. Education and art are here, not as subjects in a curriculum, but as ways of life deconstructing the meritocratic and bureaucratic schooling model that produce school evasion. Spaces where in collective community surpasses the individual competitive, revealing the production of life in relationships in an artistic attitude. We are occupants, each one in his own way, offering his. That was an attempt translation there, as you can see, because she had it in Portuguese. She was using the E in Portuguese that is neither female nor male, and we were trying, but in saying it doesn't really work. His, I don't know how. You get the meaning though. Time, courage, support, energy, and body, giving visibility to these actions and increasingly powerful speeches in the search for livable lives. The temporality of social relations expanded towards increased inclusivity, challenging the standardization of time as a measure of power, something discussed by Norbert Elias. The Okupas uncovered that it's possible to disinstitutionalize the right time for activism, as well as the narrow understanding of education. Allegedly non-productive periods of the day can be constructive for different types of encounters. Leaving the radical present freed from regimented schedules, people could dedicate themselves to politics for longer periods of time and with full attention. So this is a named lecture from another institution. That production of knowledge that I imagined at the beginning actually took place. We spent the nights talking. The chats in the evening went from 10 at night until 4 or 5 in the morning. There was no time limit. The bell was not going to ring. Things were not fragmented. There was no hush. There was freedom to express ideas and opinions. This unregimented time was made possible to collectively comprehend the parliamentary and legal procedures, as well as to learn the names of politicians, state ministers, and judges, all those people occupying the space, the state apparatus influencing educational decisions. Political understanding is a lesson that requires time, dedication, and engagement. The maturation of political practice as a collective responsibility was gradually shaped by and in the Okupas, by people themselves. Solidarity was widespread, and the Okupas received daily donations from the surrounding communities, including mattress, blankets, cleaning material, loads of foods, and messages of support. It also included the labor from people willing to organize workshops, performance, music events, and provide legal assistance. Some of the most central or affluent schools received more resources, and the Okupas made a point of consciously organizing to redistribute these resources for more outskirt or undersourced schools. Of course, not everybody supported the Okupas, and some harshly referred to them as mere puppets of the greater forces, meaning here especially left-wing parties. This echoed the ideological propaganda that was being disseminated by radio, printed newspapers, and the daily television shows. So there was, that's another one for support, sorry, there was a billboard that was put in the school, that was put in the city. I think it was only 2 or 3, but anyway, it was really nice. But no, I was now going into the resistance and then the people who disagree. So yeah, a poem by Camille says that even though committed, we were labeled like stray and idle. The occupations resisted all October. The legal battles contended the right to protest against requests of repossession and the occupied buildings. The public educational authority tried to collect personal information on the people who participated in the occupation while threatening to fine students' families. The Okupas were also constantly harassed by the violence and action of Desokupas, a term that described the right-wing groups attacking the occupations and dissatisfying members of the school community. The police were oblivious or accomplice in cases of violence, so the occupants had to organize their own protection. I'm a bit conscious here, Colleen, in terms of
Yeah,
time.
if you want to wrap up in like, 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. So I might go ahead and skip this long quotation that's nonetheless very meaningful, describing the sort of aggression that the Occupy was receiving, and how the people who were trying to de-occupy the schools were acting in terms of violence, and maybe go on just to mention a bit the ways of resistance here. And one of the slogans, or one of the words that became really big within the movement, was firme. Firme means something like steady, and steady. So firme was used from one side of the gate to the outside when people needed to know if they had support on the outside or someone looking after them. That would be the word screamed from one side to the other. Sorry. Yeah, there was a whole thing as well about how the Ocupas use social media to try to democratize communication, and the amount of cultural production surrounding. And I had a bunch of things here that I wanted to go through with you, but just to highlight that there was all this bunch of cultural production going on simultaneously. So the Ocupas try not only to maintain the flux of optimism and exchange knowledge, but also to counterbalance the hegemonic negative narrative sustained against them by the mass media. The desire to self-narrate, to make sure the experience was registered, was probably triggered by an acute feeling of living an exceptional situation. There was urgency in sharing the incredibly new discovery that life can be lived differently, that things can change, and that there are loads of people out there willing to engage in disrupting the world as it is. I'm going to make closing remarks here. It's kind of striking how the term education does not have a plural form. Education sounds incredibly weird. Education seems not to require an adjective, even though it's not easy to find a consensus neither on the meaning nor the practice of education. Except, of course, that education seems to be the only real path to progress, and that all of us should desire it for everybody, everywhere, all the time. Any other aspiration with such an overwhelming, everlasting, overreaching, universal aim would be called totalitarian or colonialist, or both. And still, we crave education. Things actually got worse since 2016 in Brazil. As you know, we have now Bolsonaro as a president. Brazil has the second higher number of deaths because of Corona, and those deaths are a direct effect of the budget freeze on public health. In Brazil, as elsewhere, COVID-19 affects disproportionately the people who do not have the class or racial privilege to self-isolate. None of the national demands held by the Ocupas in Paraná were accomplished. The budget for health and education was frozen for 20 years. The secondary school authoritarian reforms were approved. The occupations were dismantled. The schools and university were reestablished, conservative and their own normality. So the movement failed in changing the educational system and preventing the totalitarian reforms. From a more optimistic perspective, however, not all demands of the Ocupas were aimed at the state. And it's probably self-defeating to measure or accomplish using the rules of the powerful. We have witnessed that an occupation based on collective action can disinstitutionalize the rules of coexistence, dislocate the social roles, question hierarchies, and form new social bonds, at the same time mending subjectivities. It creates unexpected and unpredictable palette of human relations based on anarcho-metaculous politics that does not only imagine different worlds are possible, it lives them. The revolution is not going to happen over there. Okupa showed us that the transformation of space is the transformation of relationships, and the transformation of relationships is the transformation of people, not necessarily in that order. It teaches a different education altogether, something that surpasses the state and the colonial syllabus. Spaces can be evicted, people and relationships cannot. For happiness, there's something to be learned from that. That was what I had prepared for today, and I once again want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I hope some of you might disagree with me, because it can be very shallow conversation when we all agree. So thank you.
If anyone has any questions, comments, jump in.
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you so much. That was really stunning. It was just so exciting. I mean, both sort of your telling of the narrative of what's happening, what's happened and what's happening, and also the ways in which you're theorizing disruption and the ways in which young people are, and also sort of the vastness of, you know, the amount of engagement in this. So I have a couple questions. One, I'd love to hear a little bit more. I mean, you mentioned sort of resistance and how young people were, or how the folks who were involved in the movements were responding to resistance. I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about what tensions you saw amongst, if any, right? So obviously there is this sort of collective desire, but then even within that there is tension. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And then I love this idea of, I'm working with ideas of temporality too, and I'd love to hear you talk more about temporality and how movement spaces disrupt, the sort of political education and movement spaces disrupt particular ideas of and desires for particular notions, normative notions of temporality. Yeah, so thank you. That was really beautiful.
Do I go ahead, or do we want to put, I don't know how you usually do things. Should I just, jump into the questions? Thank you. In terms of the resistance and the tensions, so that's very significant. I think in understanding how every institution, I think, is divided by those different political projects. So I was here very much glamorizing, because I think it's worth glamorizing. So that's why I was doing all this effort. But of course, in every single school, you would have a group of both students and teachers, and every single university, both a group of students and teachers who found the whole Occupy project, puppets and created a lot of so I wasn't the quotation there that I skipped was a whole thing about the sort of violence that were subject to schools. So it was really some places where resistance were really bad. People would throw firecrackers inside the school, keep on banging on the doors, trying to enter the school, invade the school, and take off the Occupy people by violence. And of course, there was also a whole debate constantly going on social media of people calling them all sorts of names. We know the sort of trolling that goes on online. So that was that. What I think was very significant was also the level of political savviness that was gathered through seeing mass media widespread lying about the Occupy movement. That was magnificent to see the students gaining and increasing. I'm making a sort of a progress narrative here. So I'm going to jump to your second question. I don't really want to do the progress narrative, but you could see that happening. The process of awareness, because they were seeing lies about themselves. So then it made a whole difference to see how the system itself operates, if that makes sense. So the process of declaring a political stand made them way more aware of the political process itself. In terms of temporality, yeah, I don't know. I've been dealing a lot right now in the context of my PhD, trying to challenge the idea of progress that comes attached to gender equality and the way it's imagined as a colonial, that you would put some people as more advanced and all those other groups as background and incapable, and how does that played out in terms of gender. I hope I'm making sense here, even though I am aware I'm very convoluted answer. But then in the Ocupas, it was sort of like that as well, I guess, because the expectation that time is going to make things better is so much a part of our cultural experience, but at the same time you just see things rolling out the worst way. But then I guess the argument we tried to make was how when time is desinstitutionalized, when you don't have like the maths and then the language and then the PE and then you have your day divided by the institution, all of a sudden all the time is yours. It's yours, not like in an individual meaningless sort of thing. It's yours in the sense of we have all this time to create life and have the discussions that I feel like I'm repeating myself, but you seem to have an idea there, Karishma, on how time disrupts. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with temporality, and what I hear in some of the things that you're talking about, I mean, you mentioned this idea of firme or steadiness at the end. There's also something about stillness. I'm writing about some protest movements in India right now, and one of the things, and young women in the movements, and one of the things that is this resoluteness, right? This stillness, and what does that do to right-wing progress narratives in particular, and neoliberal ideas of temporality. But no, thank you, this is great.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because actually there was a lot of time of doing nothing as well. Like there's a lot of vacant time that it's magical, but can be tedious. So it's there. Yeah, interesting that you call stillness.
Anybody else?
Sure, I'll ask a question. Thank you also. This was really fascinating. So I have a friend from Brazil who is one of those that has not been politically active at all, and is still not. But more of an acquaintance, I guess. But a few years ago, I spoke with her when Bolsonaro was coming in, and she was sort of not a fan, but was sort of giving, was in a sense supporting. I mean, she's in the States now, so she's not voting, but was sort of saying it was worth a shot because things, or her perception was things were so chaotic in the country, crime, things like that, and was going to give it a shot, which I thought was kind of interesting in certain ways, and that's changed over time. But I'm wondering, so we think about the right and the left, the occupiers, the right-wing people. But has there been a shift? Is there a shift of these folks that are just not as engaged? And how does that fit into the whole movement and these kinds of actions?
Yeah, challenging one as well. Marina, if you want to jump in, I'm not sure I have I'm not in Brazil right now, and I have a distant feeling. I'm doing my PhD in Ireland, but I should say though, from where I stand, non-involvement in politics, or just is involvement in politics. Someone who's not there's the maintenance of the status quo that comes with inaction that's just there because it's going to reproduce itself. So someone who is not actively trying to change things is an accomplice with how things are. So that's completely true for Brazil. That said, it is scary because at the same time that we want to change things, you can see how much polarization itself is serving. So it's serving the maintenance of what I mean is the creation of this really polarized people who would be supporting Bolsonaro and the ones that are really anti-Bolsonaro, that somehow froze what's a political battle that comes from longer terms. Yeah, the polarization itself is also a part of the political system, I think, responds to it. And people who try to maintain neutral in this debate, they're there, and there's loads of people trying to create new possibilities within the but it can't be in between. But what would you say about that? It's not like we can find a middle ground with Bolsonaro. That's just like, I don't know, it doesn't fit me.
I think, I mean, I've seen a lot of people support him on the basis of like his economic policy stance, like, oh, like, I don't like him, but like, it's okay that he's a bigot because his political, like, economic policy is going to be better for the country. And I think as time goes by, I mean, this neutrality or like kind of partial support is kind of falling apart because it's just getting so blatant.
Right.
Yeah, Andrew, I guess as well what you mentioned in terms of Bolsonaro and your friend feeling that Bolsonaro was a new figure in Brazilian politics. It's interesting because he was actually managed to pass that image and construct that propaganda of his own persona, but that's a fake. Bolsonaro is in the Congress for more than 20 years. He's an old player in the game. He's got nothing new. Well, he does play the bold, and in this sense, in the US, you have loads of experience with those sort of politics who pretend to say the truth and speak their minds, and he does play with that character, but it's not new. It's not new politics at all, like in that sense.
Right. And and she's been here in 15, 20 years. So, so this is, she's getting her information from her networks, her family inside the country, so.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
I know we're at 1 o'clock, but if there's one more question in the chat, if anyone needs to leave, obviously. But there's a question in the chat saying, I'm curious about the concept of horizontality. What is it and how does it function? Maybe this will be our last question.
Yeah, thank you, Daniele. Yeah, we're very much, we're not actually grounding this concept of horizontality in a big literature review at all, which probably is a bit irresponsible or shallow of us, to be honest. But that said, we're trying to give name to something that we experience in the I think those images with the people sitting in circle is very much what we were trying to go to. And so the horizontality was somehow, there was an expression that was used in the occupies as well. So that might be another way of grounding or understanding. It has very much to do with the fact that there's no expected leadership, there's no spokesperson, that the committees, so there is like a cooking committee in a Ocupa, but that cooking committee is going to work for a couple of weeks, and then people can migrate to another committee, can go to another, and so there's no hierarchical, there's no pyramidal structure in the Ocupas. The horizontality has to do with the fact that there's no defined role in terms of power. Of course, then there are how much time people invest, how many people they know. There's the whole everyday dealing with it that creates sort of relations, but the Ocupa itself does not create roles that put one in a hierarchical position in terms of someone else. If that responds to your question partially, yeah.
Yeah, that answers it perfectly. Thank you.
So,
Okay, I
yeah,
think that's it.
yeah, I feel like, yeah, that's a classic that you end up talking more than you listen in those contexts. And I'm sorry, because I'm sure I would love. So, Colleen, maybe you can link me in for the next Brownback session.
I can send, of course, I can send you the flyer every week if you'd like.
Oh, that would be nice. Yeah, and once again, thank you so much. This means the world to me.
Okay, actually, Lennita, if I can talk to you for a minute, like,
Yeah, I'll be here.
you know, logistic stuff. Everyone else can
Thank
say
you.
goodbye.
Bye, Marina. Bye, Christian. Bye, Daniele.
Obrigada, Lenita. Tô emocionada. Beijo.
Beijo. A gente se fala em breve, eu espero.